The other day, a couple YouTubers made a video about some old Black Ops concept art by an artist named Nick Choles. There's a bunch of different types of zombies, and you'll see these zombies have different abilities when you read some of the descriptions that he wrote up for them. They, for example, have specialized movement or different attacks. Some of them actually reflect things that we already saw in-game, like the Streakers. And it was interesting. It gave us a completely different direction for zombies, one that's much different from what we know now. It paints the picture of a world in which, instead of getting Keener or Toten in the zombie storyline going to the route that we know it today, we get a map set in Vietnam, and who knows where the zombie storyline could have gone from there if it had chosen that direction. And it would have made a lot of sense, especially when you consider that Black Ops 1 was set in Vietnam. Why not also have your zombies map set in Vietnam? It's kind of like a zombies alternate history, a what-if scenario. We'll never know, but this concept art kind of gives us a glimpse into this potential alternate reality in which zombies was actually set in Vietnam. It's interesting. And I was actually reading a Reddit thread on this artwork, and somebody in the Reddit thread had mentioned an artist named Arnie Sweckel, who apparently had done an interview in which he had shared some cut concepts for Shangri-La. If you don't know, Arnie Sweckel is a principal artist who has worked at Raven Software now for many years, and has also lent his talents to other games such as Black Ops. So I wanted to find this artwork, and I ended up doing some digging, and I found the interview that he did with Raven. And in this video, we actually see some really interesting concept art that I wanted to share with all of you today. This is stuff that I hadn't seen prior, and I don't think has been covered on YouTube. I did some research into it, and I can only find one other video on the subject, and it was in a different language, so I imagine it hasn't actually reached the greater zombies, at least English speaking world. So I figured I would make this video today to show off some of this really interesting Shangri-La artwork that I had not seen anywhere else before. Let's dive into it. So the first image I'll show off to you guys isn't that special, but it's an initial sketch for the Shangri-La spawn room. You'll see from this perspective, you're actually looking at where the Olympia ends up being, and then the spikes that later on lead you over to the mud pit area. It's not that different than what we actually see in game. If we compare them side by side, you'll see there are some minor differences. Of course, when you recreate it in 3D, it's going to look slightly different, but this is kind of what we ended up getting in game. There's another image here, this time from almost kind of what I guess you can call the opposites perspective, and this time you're able to see the little pathways that you can take in the spawn room, as well as the center temple where quick revive is. This is how it compares to what we ended up getting in game. I find this stuff really interesting because, you know, we never think about how zombies maps are designed. You know, somehow it has to go from an idea to then being drawn out to then being modeled in 3D, and this is how it happens. First you start with a sketch like this, and then an artist goes in and recreates it in 3D. But even before I think you start designing rooms like this, you get what you see in the third picture, which are rough concepts of rooms. So this here is a rough concept for the disposal room, and this disposal room is what I think a lot of people would refer to in game right now as the elevator room. The room with the elevator shaft that leads right to the power room. You'll see, you can kind of see where the pool of water is. There's also the pathway that's even labeled to power room. You also have the pit you're able to drop down. It says escape drop down. And some ideas stick, others don't. For example, it says this drop down has roots and water dripping down its shaft. At the bottom, the player falls and is broken onto a small pile of bodies. So we ended up not falling onto a pile of bodies. What we ended up falling onto was a geyser that could shoot you up. But that must be the original concept for that. I guess first it was just pits you can jump down, and then they were like, well, let's add a way for people to get back up. And you'll see some areas didn't actually make it into the game that had sketched, so you'll see there's that little pit in the middle of the room, kind of by the escape drop down. You'll even see it leads to a room that's, I guess, labeled zombie pens. We don't know where the zombie pens were. I guess that was a room that ended up getting cut, but that's interesting right there. You'll also see over by the water, it says this waterfall falls into darkness, blocked by stalactites and mites and many body parts, and the bodies are caught on the stones before they fall over into the abyss. And there's going to be some type of holding pen stuffed with corpses. Well, the holding pen ended up being the elevator. We didn't really get water falling into darkness. In the bottom corner, it says natural cave environment mirrors the area of the falls. It begins in that cave pool and then drains into a dark, inaccessible waterfall halfway through the room. They have poured concrete down to level the floor and smooth out some of the walls, and man-made pillars help support the structure. So we don't really get any of that. There is no dark waterfall falling into an abyss. You do have kind of a cave entrance from the falls like we saw in-game. So this is kind of what happens. So you get a drawing like this, and some things make it in, like this room will lead to the power room. We'll have a little shaft, and the shaft ends up turning into a holding pen. We're going to have drop downs, and then those drop downs end up getting turned into geysers. We have little things like pits, but they're just going to get cut for whatever reason. So you start with this. Then you actually start sketching out the rooms, and then a 3D artist brings it to life. You know, you never really think too much about how these things actually start, and I guess this is it. And you have an artist going room by room, making sketches like this. This isn't just Jason slaving away for a weekend, designing the map, coming up with every little detail. No, artists come up with them, create ideas, create situations, so they come up with little stories for it. Like, oh, the laborers poured concrete so they'd have something to stand on, and I guess it makes sense a little more. I don't know, it's interesting. It's a way to bring zombies maps to life that I don't think anybody really ever sees or talks about. The next image I find fascinating, and this is of a Pack-a-Punch sketch. So almost always in zombies we have the same basic Pack-a-Punch, the one we've had since Deriz. But here, it actually came up with a whole new idea for the Pack-a-Punch. I have no idea where you would stick the weapon. We ended up not seeing a new Pack-a-Punch until I believe Shadows of Evil. We got the one with the little tentacle popping out. That was the first time we had ever seen a unique Pack-a-Punch to a map, but it wasn't the only time they had ever played with the idea, and clearly they had came up with sketches for what would be a Pack-a-Punch unique to Shangri-La. And when you think about like the Shangri-La story, when you're first starting the map, you haven't really designed the story, and you'd say to yourself, well, how do they have all this new modern technology in an ancient abandoned city? Well, they can't, so let's give them their own unique Pack-a-Punch. Maybe that's what they were thinking when they designed this one. But then they ended up bailing with the idea and then used the one we have in-game now. But it's interesting. I have no idea, like I said, where you'd stick the weapon, but that is definitely a cool concept art. So the last bit of artwork I want to show you guys is actually several stages of the concepting for the shrink gun, also known as the baby gun. And you'll see, so what he first did is he came up with a bunch of different sketches. He has one labeled A, B, C, D, E. There's even another image where it goes on, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, so forth. And they're really all interesting. Some are pistols, others are weapons that kind of look like what we ended up getting in-game. You can kind of actually see different elements get pulled in. So you have, for example, in C, the wooden shaft ends up actually being used in the baby gun. I also find there's a note on it that says all melee weapons shown are rechargeable, some by melee, other by max ammo perks. And this is an idea he toyed around with a lot when he was concepting the baby gun. You'll see a lot of them have like rechargeable options when you read some of the descriptions on them. But imagine how cool it would be if you had a massive bayonet on the end of the shrink ray, and then when you stab the zombies, you would then get ammo back. That would have been a really interesting concept. But what he did, I guess, is come up with a bunch of different designs for the baby gun. I guess about 11 in total. Probably took it on to senior management or whoever, maybe Jason, Jimmy Zielinski, whoever was running the show at the time, and said, hey, here are my designs. Which ones do you like better? And then what he did is he took some and went further with them. So, for example, the next image we see is the shrink ray second round concept. So the previous one was the first round. This is now the second one, and reading some of the notes on it are really interesting. This time he decided to go for the pistol design rather than a traditional rifle. You know, it's weird to imagine the baby gun as a pistol, but I guess that's how it was going to be. It says the bell would have somewhat of a patina bronze look to it. You'll see the bell is basically what you have sticking out of the gun. It also says when fired, a sound resonates and is ominous going and would sound as if the bell had held mystical powers that had just been unleashed. This weapon's power comes from a village bell. Its power is activated once it rings. A massive sound is distinct when fired, and the weapon will reload on its own, but slowly. So it sounds like this would kind of be a charging weapon, and the way this gun would work is maybe you'd get it from the box, but it wouldn't actually shoot anything yet. You'd have to activate it. So you'd find a bell on the map, you'd activate that bell, and then that bell would, I guess, give it power and then allow it to recharge. It's a really interesting idea. So I guess you would get the weapon and then first need to power it up by powering it. So I guess the wonder weapon would have its own power switch. And you can kind of imagine that bells in a way did get incorporated into Shangri-La. You'll remember as people do the Easter egg, you will hear what sound almost like ringings of bells. So it is kind of cool that they took this bell idea and decided not to incorporate it into the wonder weapon, but rather just some of the sounds and ambience of the Easter egg. This design process continues on though, so you'll see in the third round of concepts, I guess they completely scrapped the pistol idea and the bell, and we start to see what actually resembles our baby gun that we see in games. So it says that the stock is of a China Lake weapon, which is no longer, I guess, the longest weapon is a sniper rifle in game. So this would have been the longest weapon that we saw in game. It has alternate power sources, which I find really interesting. So each artifact is created with a different stone, therefore they have different effects when fired. So maybe potentially we would have had 4 of them and we would have elemental baby guns instead of like the shrink ray we have today. There's also a power source that is endless, but the conversion can only last for a series of shots and then it must be replaced. So you can actually see next to it the ammunition. So this is what it's red and has a little bit of fire on it. That's when you know you can shoot. And then when it is just silver, then you need to recharge it in some way. And it says in the initial concepts, you'll see the 2 little images below, it took 2 different concepts and combined them together. This is a mashup of 2 different concepts from the first stage of concept designing. It's really interesting. It has pretty much the look of the baby gun. There's a few things missing. You know, we don't have the floating dragon. It doesn't really have any of the different artifacts that you can swap out. You don't have the recharging canister. None of that's there. It just functions like the baby gun we know it today, but it's really interesting. Imagine a world in which we played Shangri-La and it was like Origins and we had 4 wonder weapons, each one with a different ability. I don't know if these artifacts would necessarily be elemental. They probably would because that's the easiest thing to do. But in some ways, a lot of this artwork is really ahead of its time. You know, you have them in Shangri-La concepting things like alternate looking pack-a-punches, which we don't end up seeing till Shadows of Evil. We have wonder weapons with alternate versions, 4 of them actually, and that's something we didn't end up seeing till Origins. It kind of gives us a look into zombies that we've never seen before. We only ever really see the finished product. Very rarely do we see this concept art, and I thought this was really interesting and I wanted to show it with you guys today. If you enjoyed this video, maybe give it a like, possibly subscribe for more. I'm always covering zombies, so if you enjoyed this video, I'm sure you'll enjoy the next one. Have a wonderful day, and bye.